Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Lars Wittrock will defend the academic thesis Biased Beliefs, Essays on Information Processing and Elicitation, and may I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Dear Prorector, dear committee, dear colleagues, friends and family. In the next 15 minutes, I'll be giving you an overview of my dissertation titled Biased Beliefs, Essays on Information Processing and Elicitation. Let me start off with a question. What are you going to do tonight? Now, let's say for this decision, you really only have two options available to you. You can join us for a party later this evening, or you could be going home on time. Now, some of you probably know already which of these two options they prefer, but some others might still be unsure because they have limited information about the party later tonight. And I'm sure there's many factors you could care about here, but let's say the one that you're most interested in is whether my two paronyms will be giving a funny speech later this evening or not. If they do, then you would prefer to come to the party. However, if they don't, then you would prefer to go home on time. Now, you likely don't know what's going to happen for sure, and neither do I, but you might have beliefs about this. Beliefs about the chance that either of these events occurs. And let's say, for example, you believe that there's a high chance that there will be a funny speech this evening. In that case, you might prefer to come. However, if you think that it's quite likely that it will be a boring evening, then you might prefer to go home on time. Now, this is one example of a decision with uncertainty that you might still be facing later this evening, but of course there's many more. You can think about everyday decisions such as where to go for lunch, and you have beliefs about the length of a queue of a restaurant. Or you can think about very impactful decisions such as where do I want to work, and you have beliefs about how fun different colleagues might be. And for all of these decisions, two factors are relevant: your preferences and your beliefs. In this dissertation, I'll be focusing on the role of beliefs. Specifically, the questions that I'll be addressing are: how do people's beliefs change in response to new and uncertain information and a retraction or confirmation thereof? And in chapter 3, I'll be looking at what information do people optimally remember over time? And in chapter 4, how to elicit beliefs from others to make a better decision. To answer these questions, I'll be making use of two different kinds of methods. I'll be conducting a theoretical analysis, which means that I'll make a number of assumptions to construct a theoretical model from which I can then derive predictions about behavior. And second, I'll be using experiments to confirm or deny these predictions. You can see these experiments as a sort of abstract game that a whole bunch of different subjects participate in, and then we analyze their behavior. All right, without further ado, let me jump into the first chapter, Belief Updating with Misinformation. There are many situations in which information is uncertain, and I will give you a few examples. So you can think about newspaper articles that haven't been confirmed by any other outlets and you just aren't quite sure about it. You can also think about factual claims by a politician, friend, or family member that you have just heard. Or you can think about anonymous rumors that have been posted online, or maybe even academic working papers that haven't been peer-reviewed quite yet. And in all of these situations, it is common that information is retracted or confirmed at a later point. So, for example, USA Today, an American newspaper, had to remove a bunch of articles after it was found that some of their sources were fabricated. Also, for political debates nowadays, it is common that these are fact-checked almost immediately, and then facts are either confirmed or retracted. Or you can think about an example a while ago. After initial rumors, Twitter had to confirm that indeed a bunch of account information had been stolen. And also for academic papers, by now actually over 400 papers on the topic of COVID-19 have been retracted. Now, with all these retractions and confirmations, I want to look at how do people actually react to those. I want to study the question, how do people respond to information about previous information? This is a very difficult question to answer in the context that I've given you here, because there are a lot of things at play, and we can't simply look into people's heads and know exactly what beliefs they have. So to answer this question, we then simplify the environment, and we arrive at something that is a lot more abstract than this, but helps us get to a better answer. And on the next 2 slides, I will walk you through to give you a little bit of an idea what we've done in our study. So I call this here an information experiment. And as you can see on screen, there's 2 different urns, a red and a blue one. And these are filled with a number of balls. Now, one of these 2 urns is randomly selected, but you don't know which one. This is your task to guess which of these 2 is selected. To help you make a better guess, a ball is drawn from this randomly selected urn, and you're shown its color. So, for example, let's say the ball that is taken out of it is a red ball. And then you ask the question, so what is the chance that the red urn was selected? Now you can think about this for a second yourself. What you might see is that this really could have come from both urns. There's a red ball in the blue urn, but there's more red balls in the red urn. So you might think, okay, it seems slightly more likely that it came from the red urn. All right, so far you might wonder, what does all of this have to do with retractions? And you're right, so far nothing at all. That's why we have a second step to this setup, where we take these 4 informative balls and put them into a black box. This black box already contains a number of other balls that I've listed here as uninformative. Now, I hope you trust me that if we take an uninformative ball out of this black box, it doesn't mean anything for the selected urn in the beginning. Only these 4 informative balls actually have some information regarding the urn that was selected in the beginning. All right, this is the experiment and the setup we have. Now I'll show you just one example of what people might have seen in our setup. So let's say there's a red ball that came out of this black box, but it's labeled with a question mark. You don't know, is this ball informative or is it uninformative? But still you ask the question, what is the chance the red urn was selected? What I'm really asking you about here is to state your beliefs. And let's say you started off with a belief that both urns are equally likely. However, after seeing this red ball, you might update your belief a little bit and think, okay, now it seems a little bit more likely that the red urn was selected. Then in a second step of our experiment, what people might see is, for example, that the previous ball, the one I've shown above, was actually uninformative. And again, you ask the question, what is the chance the red urn was selected? Now, you previously told me that there's a slightly higher chance that it came from the red urn. And now, what you really should be doing in this case is go back to your initial belief, because the ball, the uninformative one, doesn't mean anything regarding the 2 urns. So this was one example just of a type of setting that people have seen in our experiment, but there's many others. And we then analyzed the behavior of all of the people, and what we find is that the majority of people respond incorrectly to retractions, even in our quite simplified environment. Importantly, we can predict in which ways beliefs are biased afterwards, and this mainly depends on people's initial reaction. For the real world, this implies that misinformation can lead to more polarized beliefs. Beliefs are often different after you've seen uninformative information. And we might also expect an even stronger effect than what we've seen in our experiment, because in practice, oftentimes you might have reasons to be motivated to hold a certain incorrect belief. All right, let me jump to chapter 3. Optimal memory with sequential learning, signals or posterior beliefs. What is sequential learning? Now, let's say, for example, there's a new football team and you're trying to assess how good this team is before ultimately, at the end, placing a bet for or against this team. So over time, you might see, is this team winning or is this team losing, to help you make a better decision. Now, this is one example, but you can also think about the quality of a grocery store. And every time you go to the shop, you see, is the fruit in there fresh or is it not? Or you can think about the performance of an employee, for example, who does his tasks well or not, before you ultimately, at the end, you have to make a decision whether or not you want to hire this employee full-time. Now, one thing that is crucial in all of these settings before making a decision is that you remember information over time. If you don't remember anything of what you've seen, you can't really be making a good decision. These are problems frequently studied in the literature as well. However, there's one very important difference that people make. Namely, they make 2 different types of assumptions regarding what type of information people remember. There's this sort of more traditional assumption that people update and remember beliefs every time they've seen new information. So let's say, for example, you've seen that the football team won, then you might update this belief from 25%, that's a good team, to, let's say, 35%. And you carry around this belief over time, and every time you see a new signal or a new piece of information, you again update this belief. This is one type of assumption. What people more recently have done is that they've assumed that people remember individual signals, individual pieces of information. So in this case, for example, that the football team won or lost, but you don't remember a belief at all. You only form a belief once you have to make a decision. So the two differences are you remember a belief or you remember individual signals. And this leads to the question that we study in this paper, what information do people actually remember over time? Which of these two seems to be more likely to be true? All right, to answer this question, we first construct a theoretical model in which we allow people to freely choose the type of information they remember, and we make the assumption that people minimize the costs of remembering information. We find that both can be true. So in some settings, people remember signals, whilst in other people remember beliefs. Importantly, we can exactly say which type of settings these are. In environments where there's a lot of information to remember, and you're very certain that you, for example, have to place a bet on a team, you're more likely to remember beliefs, and otherwise signals. In the second step of the study, we conduct an experiment that is somewhat similar to a previous one, however with a different framing. So I'm not going to go through it once more. What we find in this experiment is that we can confirm our theoretical predictions. People rationally choose what information they remember over time. All right, on to the last chapter. Useful forecasting, belief elicitation for decision making. With this, I would also like to return once more to the initial example, where you had the decision, do I want to go to the party or not? But you had limited information about the speech from my parents. Now, this information is of course important to you, and while you might have limited information, it could be that there are some people that have a bit more information than you. And in this example right here, there are two people, one is very positive and one is maybe rather pessimistic, if it will be a funny speech. Now, ideally, you'd like to have this information, but these people, they might also be biased. They don't just have beliefs, they might also want you to take a certain action. So, for example, one person might want you to come to the party, and another person might want you to go home. So if you simply ask those people for their beliefs, they might report wrong information to you. They might try to influence the decision that you're going to make. This is just one example for what you might still face today, but in the paper I discussed, for example, the case where Obama a while ago had to make a decision whether to attempt capture of bin Laden or not. And what he did in practice was he asked a group of agents to report an individual belief that bin Laden was at a certain location. However, it is also well documented that some of these agents strategically misreported the information they had to influence the decision that Obama was going to make. This is just one other context, and I leave you to think about other ones. The question I ask is, how can we incentivize experts to report the information truthfully? To answer this question, I answer this question theoretically. By that I mean I first make a couple of assumptions. So, for example, saying that people are rational and I can simplify the choice environment, and I then design an incentive mechanism. With different incentive mechanisms, I can then find out how people respond in this and if they're going to report the information truthfully or not. What I find is that if you apply a common type of incentive mechanism and only ask a single person that's potentially biased, you cannot guarantee that this person will report the information truthfully. However, if you ask a group of people, namely the group of people being such that at least one person is biased in either way, then in almost all cases you can guarantee truth-telling by these experts. And this also works if this group becomes much larger, and there are, for example, many people that are biased in one way. As long as there's one person biased in the other direction, you still get truth-telling by these experts. All right, with this I would like to summarize my dissertation. I've shown you today that beliefs are biased. And in chapter 2, I've shown that we can predict biases after retractions and confirmations. I've also shown you that the decision environment matters for what information people remember. And in chapter 4, I've shown that consulting a diverse group of experts can reduce biases and lead to better decisions. Thank you very much. With this, I would like to hand the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Now it's time for the opposition. The opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee, Professor Christian Zeel, and he is a professor in economic theory, market design and regulation of this university.
Dear candidate, dear Lars, first of all, let me congratulate you on a really, really nice piece of work that you submitted. And I think there is a big contribution, and already when I started it, I had a very high prior, and the prior did not go down while reading it. So let me come to my question. My first question is about chapter 2 in your dissertation. And basically in your empirical findings, you find that the first information plays a big role in terms of the biases you can predict later on. What's not entirely clear to me from the dissertation is the channel through which this happens. And I can offer you two possible channels, and I would like to hear your thoughts on these two channels. So the first channel is a purely mechanical channel, a statistical channel where the updating of beliefs is not done properly, but there is some error term associated to it. Maybe this error term decreases over time. And the question is, could you write down such a model which would essentially predict the type of belief that you get? Yeah, so this is the first part. And the second explanation that I would have is more like a psychological explanation, which would say, okay, so you know from psychology that, for instance, if you see a danger, then your body starts shaking. You see a lion coming, your body starts shaking, and then when the lion is gone, your body still shakes. So the initial signal is, so to speak, still there. And yeah, this could also be an explanation for why you overweigh the initial signal. So one is purely mechanical, and the other one is more psychological. And I wonder if you can comment on this, and otherwise maybe suggest another channel from which these results can be explained.
Dear highly esteemed opponents, first of all, thank you very much for those very kind words. And of course also for the very good question. Now, we've indeed not tested the mechanism through which this runs in this paper. Unfortunately, we didn't get to this quite yet. I still can speculate on what I think appears most likely. You've suggested two potential mechanisms. I think the idea I had so far in my head is, I'm not sure if it's exactly one of those two, but maybe if it lies somewhere in between. So how I think about it so far is that it's a little bit of a problem of memory as well. That you might not fully remember the initial prior that you had, so a bit more the psychology explanation, but you know roughly the direction it was in. And then you sort of you know a little bit how much you should respond to a retraction. You know that for a retraction of information, you should probably be updating your belief in a certain direction. However, you struggle a little bit with how far that direction is. So I think there's some component to it where you attach informational value to a retraction by itself, even though that is rather meaningless. So the value of a retraction is totally bound to the signal that you've seen beforehand. But I think what might be going on, and this is pure speculation at this point, is that people might be attaching informational value to the retraction. They might know, for example, something like, oh, I've seen a retraction, I should go back by 10 percentage points. And if they then don't know exactly where the initial prior was, then they sort of combine these two processes where they have some thought, oh, I should probably be going back something like 10 percentage points, and then they might end up either way of the initial prior. This is at least how I thought about it so far. Of course, we haven't gotten around to fully testing this mechanism, but I hope it gives you an idea of how I think about it at least.
You're satisfied with the answer?
Yeah, maybe just as a short follow-up. So did you try to write down a model which would capture that?
We have been talking about writing a model that would capture this indeed. Yeah, we haven't done this yet. We thought so far, yeah, maybe we can do this in follow-on work. But yeah, there's no formal model that we've written down so far.
Okay, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by the second member of the assessment committee who is online, and that is Professor Aurélien Bayon. He is a professor of the economics of uncertainty, and he is from EM Lyon Business School.
Dear candidate, well, I'm going to join my predecessor in congratulate you on your piece of work, on your PhD thesis. I must say that when because it includes both theory and experiments, that's already something I like very much. I was very happy to see this nice combination, and it was everything was very high level. I'd like to ask a question about chapter 4. To some extent, chapter 4, you can interpret it a bit as the symmetric of the voting paradox. In voting, voting has a cost, and we will sometimes wonder why people would vote if it has a cost and if they don't think they're going to have an impact. And in your case, it's reporting has a benefit with the scoring rule, and then why people will lie if they don't have an impact anyhow. So it's in a way kind of a symmetric of the voting paradox. So I liked it very much, and then I felt, well, there's still a very important assumption you're making, which is we can observe the state of the world afterwards. And a scoring rule that you're using is a contract on the state of nature. But what if we cannot? And if I use your Obama Bin Laden example, if they hadn't conducted, if they hadn't run the operation, maybe they would have never known whether he had been there or not. So sometimes, depending on the action, you will discover the state of nature. And in some actions, you will not know the state of nature. In some other cases, we may know, but too late. And so, for instance, if you think about the long-term effect of climate change, we might learn whether the experts are correct way too late, way after the decisions are made. So my question to you is, how can we address such situations? Can you tell us a bit what would be the complications? Which type of literature could help you? Yeah, how have you thought of these problems?
Yes, highly esteemed opponents. Also to you, thank you for those very kind words. And yeah, that is a very good question. I have thought about this some time ago, and I'll try to recollect my thoughts a little bit as best as I can on this problem. Yeah, so indeed the assumption that I'm making is that I can perfectly observe the state of the world after the fact and before I can pay out participants in this mechanism. Because otherwise, at least how I've designed the model so far, this doesn't work. I need knowledge about this. I see this as a sort of simplifying assumption where, yeah, like this helped me quite a bit in making the analysis for me still a little bit more tractable. As I understand, and this has been a while ago since I've read into this literature, there are papers out there that have used this type of incentive scheme based on scoring rules and do make you allow for the state of the world not to be perfect, not to be revealed at the end. I am not entirely sure at this very point how precisely these mechanisms worked. I think it was something about eliciting second-order beliefs as well, but I think I would be speculating too much. But yeah, I guess I would very much try to rely on the existing work here, and I think the sort of idea that I want to convey in this paper is that with a decision you get this additional problem of truth-telling or not. I think this might still be applicable in such a setting as well. Yeah, of course, I mean, I can't do the analysis immediately now, but yeah, this is probably the way I would go.
Professor Bayon, you are satisfied with the answer?
Yeah, so you mentioned on one part of the literature, which is it's related, among other things, to the Bayesian truth theorem, which is using a scoring rule for that. But there's also more generally like papers by Kramer and MacLean in 1988, like very old papers. And I've always been told by my PhD supervisor that when you become older, your role becomes just to remind young people of old papers. So I thought I could use the opportunity. And so I don't know whether you know Kramer and MacLean 1988, but it's a paper that could, it's one of the original papers in that old field.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. The Bayesian truth theorem was indeed the one I was referring to. Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by the third member of the assessment committee, who is also online, Professor Sigrid Sutens. She is a professor of behavioral economics at Tilburg University.
Yes, dear candidates, I would also like to join the other committee members in congratulating you on this really nice thesis. It combines experiments and theory to study really a very urgent and important topic these days, right? The role of information and beliefs. What I really like also about the thesis, I should mention, this is that it's extremely well written and beautifully laid out. The graphs are really wonderful. I can really appreciate that. So my question is on chapter 3 on optimal memory with sequential learning. So in this chapter, you basically show that there's these two approaches, right? Which you also discussed in your presentation. You called the traditional approach and behavioral approach that are present in the literature to study optimal memory with sequential learning. So in one case, people tend to recall the past beliefs, their past posterior beliefs, basically, and in the other case, they tend to recall past signals. And as you detected, that it happens to be the case that both of these approaches have been studied in different environments in the literature. So you unify the two approaches in one model, and you indeed generate basically different updating processes depending on the environment. Now, in order to test, right, which of these two approaches or models is behaviorally the best fit for analyzing optimal memory with sequential learning in real behavior, right, you create two environments, I would say, in an experimental environment. So in one case, it's quite natural, I guess, to recall past signals and then forget about the beliefs. And in the other case, where it's more natural to recall the beliefs rather than the signals. And then you kind of confirm your hypothesis, finding that people indeed tend to recall past signals in one environment and then the posterior beliefs in the other environment. Now, the experiment is really creative and fascinating. That said, the results are not that surprising in some sense, right? Because you artificially induce these environments, and then maybe it's not such a surprise that you also then basically get what you induce, right? What you put in. Right? So the first part of my question is basically whether you can discuss a little bit what you think is the added value of such an experiment on top of basically the rest of that chapter. So what do we learn more about the relevance of each of these models for real-life memory formation that we do not know on the basis of the literature review and then the theoretical model? Doesn't it just simply confirm that agents are rational and have bounded memory, which kind of we already knew from other experiments? The second part of the question is whether I wonder wouldn't there be like an alternative approach, basically, where you would create an environment where both types of recall can coexist and they each basically get, let's say, a decent chance, and then study which is the most prominent, maybe depending on certain individual characteristics also of the decision makers. Yes, that's my question.
Highly esteemed opponent. Yeah, also like those were very nice words about my dissertation. Thank you for those. And yeah, you do raise a very good question. So we've set out this experiment to sort of proof of concept, and that we've created in settings that lead to different results. And indeed, you can say, well, like those settings are so different. Isn't it obvious in those cases that you get this result? I think the added value of this is important when, especially when talking about people that aren't rational in their memory and updating process. So the two different processes, whether people remember signals or they update beliefs every time, that should lead to the exactly identical decision for an agent that's perfectly rational. So if we study perfectly rational people, it really doesn't matter which of these two assumptions we make. However, once we introduce some kind of constraints, such as a person might be biased in the updating in a certain way, or they might selectively recall information, in that case, I think there is a lot of added value of making sure that you do understand how this cognitive process works. Because the decisions people make in the end, or like, well, first of all, the beliefs people arrive at in the end can definitely differ based on the environment and the resulting decision. Can definitely differ based on this environment, and with that, you can also lead to different decisions. So I think it is important that we get a better understanding of how people process information when studying their biases. Have we created a setting which we're studying that is more similar to a setting where people remember signals rather than beliefs? Does that maybe explain the behavior we see in the end? Yeah, so I guess this is what I think is the most important contribution of this paper, and sort of so far this paper is maybe still at a little bit of a proof of concept phase, and ideally we would like to show still afterwards that these different settings can indeed lead to differently biased beliefs and different decisions. Yeah, I hope with that I answered both your questions. Or could you repeat?
Can I react a little bit? Yes, so I mean, you do, of course, show that people indeed update beliefs differently depending on the environment, that's clear. Now, I wonder whether, what do we learn about kind of, like real memory formation in real life, basically, when it's not so clear, that I should like focus on the signals or focus on the beliefs. So when both are possible, like what is the force that is the most important one?
Right.
Which is like, Yeah,
so what we also see in our experiment is that it's not 100% clear-cut, the results, such that in the two different settings, all subjects behave in a certain way, and in the other subjects, all subjects behave the other way. So there is definitely some person component to this that is very interesting, and I think some people might just be better at updating, whilst others might be better at remembering individual signals. We have tried to test for this a little bit in the sense of using this filler task that we had, where we essentially got a little bit of an idea of the math and memory capabilities of people. We have tried to explain, based on this like sort of estimated ability of people's memory and updating, whether there are differences, but we haven't found anything. So with this, we can't predict it yet, but I'm sure there are other factors that could do this in a better way to explain sort of person-specific component a little bit more. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by the fourth member of the assessment committee. That is Dr. Christopher Kops, who is at the Department of Quantitative Economics of this university.
Dear candidate, dear Lars, so after 3 positive signals in a row, I think it's time for another positive one. So I really like the thesis. So I can only follow up that it combining theory and experiments. I really enjoyed that, and then also the topics of uncertainty and information. That's very timely. So I thought with my question, I go back to chapter 2 and try to actually combine this with the theory even more. So from theory, especially when you go the direction of subjective expected utility, you would never say that you can actually directly elicit beliefs, right? You would always try to do this indirectly over choices, right? And then say, maybe that's as if they have them. So can't you also do this here, even with the data that you collected? That's basically my question. So if in the end it's not just about whether they have the correctly updated belief, but about whether then in that moment you would ask them, is the urn red or blue, would they make the correct choice?
Yeah. Esteemed opponents, thank you for this, all of these positive signals. And thank you for this very good question. Yeah, that is definitely an interesting one. Like, so essentially what you're saying is that maybe we can just study the effects on decisions of people rather than focusing on the belief updating process, which there might be like all sorts of things going on, indeed. Yeah, so I would very much like to do this, and we haven't done this so far, so all of this is just speculation, of course. It's one problem with it, so I think why we focused on getting more precise beliefs is that we can, essentially we have better data this way. If we just have the purely like the choice as the only data, do you choose this or that? It might be a little bit more, it might be less clear what exactly you'll find, and I guess if we had started like this, we never would have gotten to the mechanism to the finding we have that this initial reaction matters so much. So I think what you're suggesting is essentially a very good way to test this idea in a maybe more practical setting where it's anyway difficult to elicit beliefs, if those exist, but it becomes a lot easier to focus on decisions. So I would be very interested to see what's, if we can, or if we could somehow apply the ideas from this paper and put them into a more applied setting where we then elicit decisions between two options. This would definitely strengthen the results if we do find this. If we don't, then it's anyone's guess what's going on. Yeah.
Dr. Kaps, you're satisfied with the answer?
Yes, but I was even thinking, can't you also use the data that you have? So for instance, if it is like, I don't know, it's 60% for the red urn, we could count this as them saying that it's probably the red urn, right? And then whether in the end, right, if you then look at all the data that you have, this would be in line with the truth, right? Or close enough to, I don't know, the bias update or what it would then...
Right, so essentially bundling all the... yes, I guess in principle we do have this data and could definitely do this. I wonder if there are differences in how people sort of think when they either would have to make a choice which one of these two seems more likely, or whether they just give me a belief. It could be that, yeah, we can make this assumption that if the belief is larger than 50%, this should imply a choice of this specific urn. If this is exactly the thought process people have, so yeah, interesting to test, but I think I would also like to see only a setting where we don't elicit beliefs at all and purely focus on decisions. This would strengthen your idea, I think.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Jona Linde, who is a member of the Department of Microeconomics and Public Economics of this university.
Dear candidate, dear Lars, as probably expected based on the previous signals, also a positive signal from my side. I really appreciated the thesis and especially these very intricate yet cleanly designed experiments. I really love this type of experiment, and these were really well done. I do have a question on the theory, though. Maybe the experiments were so clean and nice that I couldn't think of a good question there. It's related to chapter 3. There, you say in order to get your results, you need to make the assumption that people a priori or ex ante commit to an optimal strategy. And I could not quite figure out why that was a necessary assumption, and maybe that's the case because it's not really necessary, maybe in the case in your experiment, but there are others where it is. So I was wondering whether you could tell me why you need this assumption and perhaps give me an example of where this really matters.
Yeah. Dear esteemed opponents, also thank you for those nice words. And that is a very good question. So it allows us basically to simplify the analysis that we're doing. And I think why this assumption is necessary is because sometimes there are interesting things going on otherwise, such as people in the beginning trying to remember a signal and then afterwards changing their strategy to something else. So you have a sort of combined, all right, let me restart. So we have so far tried to assume that people either remember signals or they remember beliefs, but there could be different things going on for different signals. So it could be that for the first couple of signals, for example, you remember a signal, the signal itself still, then you update a belief, and then from there on you remember beliefs only. As far as I remember, we made this assumption to make this a little bit more clear, to sort of get rid of the batch updating problematic, especially in settings where you might have few signals, I believe. I think the problem was indeed that it could otherwise sometimes be a good idea to first remember a signal and then jump to remembering beliefs. And so far we've ruled this a little bit out by letting people make clear to clearly choose their strategy ex ante already. I agree it's probably not the cleanest assumption in the sense of how people's thinking process actually works in practice. I think might not always be this way. You might not fully commit to choosing, okay, for this type of problem, I will only remember signals from here on out. Is probably not how it would work in practice. See the model as a sort of toy model so far to illustrate our idea rather than being very precise on all the assumptions in practice.
Dr. Linde, satisfied? The opposition will be continued by Dr. Thomas Meissner, member of the Department of Microeconomics and Public Economics of this university.
Yeah, dear candidate, dear Lars, let me join everyone else in congratulating you to a really nice thesis. So all signals are positive. It's great. I would like to talk to you about chapter 2, the experiment, which I think is really cool, really clever design. But I would like to talk to you about the data analysis, which I think is nicely done and very clear. But there's one footnote, right? So you changed the analysis relative to the pre-registration. And I would like you to elaborate on why, right? So you talk about potential problems with the pre-registered framework, and I'm wondering what's going on. Was the analysis just not possible the way that you pre-registered it, or did it not actually test what you intended it to test, or were the results weird? Did they not make much sense? Could you maybe talk about that? And then also a second question, what do you think, how generous should we be as a profession in dealing with such changes ex post?
Dear esteemed opponents, thank you for those words, and that is a very good question. I think also not just a very specific change, but more fundamentally. So the pre-registration, let me walk you through a little bit how we got to this. The pre-registration was done relatively early on, and we weren't exactly sure yet in which direction we were going. And the one thing that we've changed in terms of the analysis was that we follow a little bit more the analysis Benjamin has done in his paper, where we estimate overinference and base rate neglect. This, I guess, a little embarrassingly, we were not entirely sure, or we had started with a project where the base rate was always 50%, or where the prior was always 50%, And we had focused entirely on studying how people infer, what people infer from a signal, and then the study of over and under inference. And after some initial, after like taking the project basically a slightly different direction, we had, at this point, I think, somewhat forgotten that now we also have to deal with cases in which subjects don't have a prior of 50% anymore. So it becomes important that we allow for this component of studying base rate neglect. So in this specific case, I hope that there's relatively little problem with changing the analysis this way. In fact, I believe the problems would be much more significant if we didn't change it. More generally speaking, pre-registrations, in my opinion, are a very good thing if you try to test very specific predictions. They should, however, leave a little bit of room to some sort of exploratory analysis maybe, or to like additional insights you've gained afterwards, or to like a clever suggestion from a colleague. So there should always be room for adapting whatever you're doing to allow for this. Maybe I should have specified a little bit more precisely what exactly is different in this case. But yeah, so I guess in short, pre-registrations I think are good, but should leave this sort of flexibility to adjust if you learn new things.
Dr. Meissner, you are satisfied with the answer?
Yeah, thank you.
We go into a second round. There's time enough for that. And the opposition will be continued by Professor Christian Zeel.
Okay, my second question is about chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you talk a lot about how it's difficult to remember old information that you already know about. So, I mean, if you think about rational inattention models, the question is usually in terms of searching for information. First of all, I would like to understand if there is some connection between the two things. And secondly, if you, from your model, if you can say something about how somebody who is, for instance, good at remembering beliefs, how this person would look for information, strategically already taking this into account.
That is a very good question, I think. I must be honest, I haven't really thought about the connection with the types of rational inattention models quite yet. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. Okay, so how we, I guess how we think about our setup so far is a rather deterministic whether you remember something or not. Like both for signals and beliefs, there's this like either a 0 or 1, like you do remember something or you don't. In practice, or well, we made this assumption to essentially simplify our theory so far. But in practice, this might be a process that's slightly more stochastic, where you have certain chances of remembering something or not. It could be that this then works a little bit better in combination with rational inattention models. In terms of how people themselves should look for information or try, like the strategies they choose, I think anything I can say on this point will definitely just be speculation at this point. There must be people that are better at one thing versus the other for sure, so they probably figure this out over the time themselves. Which works better for them. I'm not entirely sure how I can directly make this connection to the other types of models. I would like to talk about this afterwards, maybe, because I think this is an interesting one. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. I mean, it's purely exploratory, of course, and thank you for your answer.
The opposition will be continued by an online committee member from Lyon, and that is Professor Aurélien Bayon.
Yes. So I heard from the rector that the Maastricht University accepts the PhD defenses in French, so I would like to ask my question in French if I can. No, just kidding, don't worry. So my question would be about chapter 2. And about something you mentioned several times in chapter 2, which is motivated reasoning. And to some extent, you brush it away. You say, yeah, there's motivated reasoning. And in two different ways. So so several times you write that you expect it will amplify your results. And the first part of my question will be, could it be that in some cases it actually doesn't amplify? I mean, I'm not sure. Like if you think about the example you gave in your presentation, would that really, if there was motivated reasoning, you could expect that it actually doesn't amplify, that when people update their belief, when it's retracted, if they have interest to think the opposite, they might go even further in the direction. So could we really say it just amplifies? So that's the first part. The second part of the question is you justify the fact that you use urns and bowls by the fact that you want something artificial such that there's no motivated reasoning. Is it really the only way to do so? Could you have no motivated reasoning and something a bit more natural than urns and bowls? So those are the two parts. Bonne chance.
Thank you for those two questions. Let me maybe start with the second one, and I think that is an easy yes to that question. There are definitely other settings that could be more applied already and still remain neutral in the sense of abstracting away from motivated reasoning. I think I essentially tried something like this for chapter 3, the experiment, where I try to, the basic idea is still similar to the urns and balls, where you have noisy signals about the state of the world and you should update in a certain way. So essentially you could replace this with balls and urns, but we tried to give it a little bit more of a framing around it. I think why we didn't do this in this paper quite yet was also to try and keep it consistent with what a lot of people in the literature have done. Yeah, this might be a boring answer. I guess that was the truth of why we made this choice. Now, regarding the other question about how would motivated reasoning interact with what we find here, at least how I think about it, it doesn't necessarily have to amplify results in one specific direction, but it could really work in either way. So let's say I take just a political example of for example, Democrats or Republican, which party you support and which one would make for a better president. There are different people, of course, that might be naturally biased in one direction or the other. So if you tell a person that is, for example, a Democrat already, he might try, and if you then give that person a signal that is sort of in the direction of, or a positive signal for Democrats, then that person might already be taking away more from an uncertain signal than a different person. And if I retract the signal, might be biased or might be biased in the sense that he doesn't go as far back as he should more often than another person with a different motivation. So this is the sort of the idea I had of the interaction you might get with motivated reasoning and this bias that we suggest here. It's probably not as strong as that in all settings, and I would be very interested to find out if this really does work this way, as I just suggested, or if we should think about the bias I found here as a more of a cognitive processing, sort of maybe a mechanical calculation bias almost, or is it really strongly affected by a type of motivation that you might have? Yeah.
Professor Bayon, you're satisfied with the answer?
Yes, if I may still make a small reference to an old papers about urns and balls. So in 1992, Kammerer and Weber wrote, so it was not about learning, it was about ambiguity, but they say at the end of their paper, there's diminishing marginal returns in studying urns and balls. And so that was in 1992. There are so many papers just studying urns and balls that maybe we should move to something else. That's, again, like a reference to an old paper.
Yes, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Sigrid Sutens of Tilburg University.
Yes, so I have a question about chapter 4. Basically, kind of an application question. So think, for example, of a hiring committee, for example, at a university department, who wants to hire tenure-track professors, or let's say. So what would you advise how to compose such a committee? Because as far as I can see, okay, in most cases, these committees, they consist of professors who each have their own preferences, their own fields, their own views on who should be the ultimate candidate, right? So the diverse preferences, I think that's kind of a very plausible assumption. And each preference is represented by at least one expert. Now, yes, what would be your practical advice on how to compose such a committee to, let's say, the head of department?
That's a very good, a very interesting question. I would like to study further how to apply this. How I would think about it so far is that what I find is that you should basically ask the more agents or the more experts, the better. Like rather than having one expert, the expert that you pay a lot of incentive or like a lot of rewards to if he's correct, you should, let's say, for example, take your fixed budget and spread it over as many people as possible. So rather asking or like rather picking a bigger selection group than a smaller one should help for the condition that I have on no pivotality, basically. So I get truth-telling in my setting if no expert is individually pivotal to the decision. And this is mainly the case, or like more likely the case if you have a bigger committee. And yeah, the only other factor I could really think about is making sure that there's at least one person that would prefer either option. And you already said this. This seems quite practical, or like quite likely to be the case in practice, that committees are naturally already composed in such a way that there is at least one person that prefers either action. Those are really the only two requirements I have, or the two main conditions I have in the paper. Apart from those two,
can I have?
Yeah, sorry.
No, like a quick follow-up, perhaps. Like to make it even more practical, suppose there's, let's say, 10 candidates in the final round. Would you then recommend that there's at least 10 experts in the committee, or how should I see that? Because, of course, there's also budget requirements, obviously, and that sounds like, yeah, that's kind of not a feasible thing to do. So what does your model predict here, or what would be your practical recommendations on the basis of your theoretical prediction?
Right, so you suggest that a setting where there are 10 different candidates, for example. I mean, in my model, I've simplified it as much as possible. So the only thing I really look at is, let's say there's one candidate and the decision is yes or no. And I want people to be biased, one sort of in the no direction and one in the yes direction. How this would extend to multiple candidates, so essentially like broader state space, is an interesting question, and I'm not entirely sure how to immediately answer this. I guess to keep it closer to my model, you should probably be making individual decisions for each candidate, which maybe is not how it works in practice, that you can make individual decisions for each candidate, because there is a fixed constraint. So how to deal with there being multiple options available is an interesting one, and at this point I think I can't really say much further about this, unfortunately.
Okay, I just wanted to, yes, use your brain to think about this. Thank you so much.
You are satisfied, Professor Sutens? Thank you.
Yes.
Lars Wittrock, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Lars, Wittrock. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Tsakas is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Lars Oliver Wittrock, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Yeah, Martin and I will share the laudatio. I would like to start at the time when we first met, and I looked it up. That was now exactly 6 years ago, this time of the year. Period 2 registration, you registered for one of my courses, and you were one of only 2 registrations for this course. It's not uncommon, however. I had never more than 2 students. Yeah, I must say, before the course started, I had been warned by a colleague about you too. Namely, well, the warning was, this will be exceptionally good students. And it's important information for a course coordinator. So it turned out to be true. So I must say, really, a gift of you is really that you do not let yourself get distracted by technicalities and formulas and jargon and so on, but you always try to look at the economics behind it and whether it makes sense. Well, nevertheless, I tightened some screws in my course before it started so that no one will be bored. Yeah. Soon afterwards, you became a PhD in our department. With Martin and Elias. I was not one of your supervisors at first, but sometime during, I believe, the second half of your PhD, you came to me with your solo paper, and yeah, you had pretty much already a complete draft with results and motivation, discussions and everything. But there were also some conjectures, and you had some conjectures for possible further results. So we looked at that and examined what could be done there. Definitely, there were many open questions, and one can, as we've also discussed in the defense today, there are many routes, of course, where one could extend it. However, it would also not be super easy to try the one or the other, and it would have cost quite some time. So in the end, what we worked on was like turning this draft into the final version for the PhD. Well, since Martin also has some words to say, I must stop here. It was great to work with you. I must say, yeah. pretty much already during your PhD you were a very independent researcher. So work is probably for my part in this process a bit of an exaggeration. It was great. I wish you all the best and congrats on this very nice achievement.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, Lars, congratulations first, of course, Dr. Wittrock. And I also want to go a bit back, because I want to go even further back than Stefan. This was a day when Christian bumped into my office and said, "Oh, I have this brilliant student, and I have another one who's also not bad." And we have to get them for the research master. So one of these students was you. And indeed, we made it happen, right? So you both started in a research master, and I mean, you performed, as Stefan already said, exceptionally well. I was not teaching in this program, but I do remember we had several meetings, mainly in bars. And actually, I think it was in the Governor, right, where we tried to experimentally prove the hypothesis that 20 Oranginas give as much headache as 20 beers. And we didn't reach the 20, but I think the data set was rich enough to prove the hypothesis. At least I had headache afterwards. I was the Orangina guy. And then you and Ferdi, you put the bar quite high, and I couldn't remember the name of the third student who also was starting the research. But he had sometimes quite a hard time. I mean, you put the bar high and he had to jump, right? That was... Well, eventually you graduated. And actually, I felt quite privileged when you decided that you would choose our offer to do a PhD. And you choose it over the offer, for example, from Stockholm, which actually made me quite proud of also Maastricht, that people choose us over Stockholm. And so Elias actually supervised your master thesis, and then I joined the team because you were also interested in experiments. Working with you was sometimes difficult, and I have to explain this more in detail. So I try to do this with a kind of example. So I don't know whether you know this. This comes from my home region in southern Germany. It says Kehrwoche. And this is a kind of board which you have if you live with multiple parties in one house. Then every week somebody has to do the chores, like get out the trash and then, let's say, clean the staircases and the driveways and stuff like that. So in that, once you have done this, you take this little board, which was hanging on your door, and you put it and hang it to the neighbor's door, because next week it will be his turn. And that's actually what I'm doing when I'm working with PhD students and co-authors. I try to get my chores done, and then I mentally take this little board and put it, I send them an email and says, now the thing is in your place. So why was this now difficult in your case? Because I was doing my stuff in the afternoon. I was sending you an email, and I leaned back and I thought, okay, now let me turn to other things. And the next day I woke up, I had this board again on my door. And that was actually the thing which made it quite difficult. So actually, what do we do with such active people? And that's where we thought, okay, we bring in Stefan, right, who would keep you busy with one chapter. And we also enabled you to go to Cornell University, right? So Colin Raymond actually supervised your third paper, and that reduced a bit the workload, at least on my side. I mean, at the end, it turned out to be an excellent thesis. And yeah, and you work quite fast and careful. That's actually something which, let's say, makes you stick out. Because I know many people who can work either careful or fast. I myself, I'm never fast. Sometimes I'm careful. But then you could do both. And that was actually quite impressive. So I have to keep it short, so I will cut a bit. I mean, You also did some other things right next to it. This was also impressive. Martin promised me he would make strange movements. He's still sitting there, so it's okay. So you run the Lions then. During your study time, you were cycling with David. Paul actually told me that in this time you have become a veritable chess player. So that means you were quite active not only on the research frontier. You were active in the GSB board and in the PhD committee. Now, eventually, now you decided to, let's say, leave academia and work for the authorities. And actually, this made me make up a good plan, because you know, we are all not very, let's say, happy with the future lookout for politics. I mean, we all think that the coming government or the government is actually screwing it. And so I thought, and that's even worse because, for example, Stefan and I, we are not even allowed to vote here in the Netherlands, right? So we cannot do anything. So I thought the new plan will be we send our best people to Den Haag, becoming top administrators, at least in the administration, the top positions, and we hope that they will then fix it once when the government is trying to screw the things. So let me now let me close this. So take care of first yourself, your family, and take care of the Netherlands in then.
It's a big responsibility.
And, all the best for your future.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Wittrock, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And the continuation of the program is now as follows. There is a reception, so you stay on this floor, you go outside of this room and you go to the right, through a corridor, there is the refter. For some of us here in the committee, and also you, Lars, there's still a photo session, but we will see you later in the refter. Thank you.
Careful with my flowers. Please come forward. Paraninfa aan beide kanten. Supervisors daarachter.